Welcome to the program. My guest is Barry Barlow, the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Vencor. Barry, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks.
Let me set a little context for our discussion today. The federal government is spending big bucks on connected technologies, otherwise known as the Internet of Things. Market research firm Gavini estimated agencies spent almost $9 billion on these connected devices, with 56% of these of the increase on sensors alone. Now, Gavini found that the cloud is driving the Internet of Things, especially platform as a service. The firms say the Defense Department accounted for 45.6% of spending on platform as a service between 2011 and 2015, and civilian agency spending was led by DHS, VA, Justice, HHS, and the Social Security Administration. Now, with this huge spending spree on connected devices, it reasons that concerns about cybersecurity of this technology also will grow. In fact, Earl Perkins, Vice President of Research at Gartner, says every industry from transportation to medical to entertainment will be affected by IoT, making the attack surface larger than we've ever seen before. Perkins says agencies, industry, really all of us, have to recalculate this idea of risk as well as safety because of IoT threats. Now, Perkins adds IoT will cause companies to rethink how they secure these connected devices at what they call the embedded level, so cybersecurity will have to be built into the device itself. And he says IoT can't work without the cloud, requiring us to rethink how to secure these services as well. Now, as IoT grows, there's still several questions that require answers, particularly the government's role in overseeing or helping to secure connected devices. Agencies, businesses, citizens are still figuring out how the trade-offs between the efficiencies of these connected devices and the cyber risks that they can accept. So with that context in place, let's start our discussion. Once again, my guest is Barry Barlow, the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Vencor. Let's just define IoT, Internet of Things, Barry. I kind of gave a brief definition, connected devices, but give me the broader definition.
So the broader definition, to help put things in context, let's compare something we know a lot about, the internet, which is just computers, servers, laptops, all connected to a global information grid, to the Internet of Things, which is a relatively new term. It's been around 15 years ago, and it referred to embedded devices or sensors which now have the capability to transmit information over the internet. And then the superset of that, you may have heard the term Internet of Everything, which was invented by Cisco just to create a marketing brand around that. It connects people, it connects devices, it connects data, and it connects applications. And we're all part of that Internet of Everything. If I'm a person, I'm connected to it via social media. From a device standpoint, I may have a Fitbit, I may have a thermostat that is also connected to it as well. There's data that's flowing from my device, sometimes at my request, sometimes automatically, into an application which enables people to make decisions. You know, as an example, the soda machine at our office is connected to Pepsi, so that as the stock runs down, it will automatically order more equipment. And at the company where my brother works, Howard Industries, they make electrical transformers. Right now, they're very busy following Hurricane Matthew. And so the presses there that are fabricating the transformers also automatically order stock as they grow low. And so that's just an example of how we've moved from an environment where people are driving decisions and actions to where machines have some authority to do that on their own in the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything.
Well, what's interesting about this concept, and I think sometimes people overlook, is with the increase of the connected devices, whether it's an oven or your refrigerator, you know, when you run out of milk, it knows you ran out of milk, or it comes up with a shopping list. What are the 10 things or 20 things you buy every week? Right. They're forgetting what that means because everything is then connected to a device, and that device is connected to the public internet, and then therefore you are now exposing yourself in such a big way. Do you think that's not quite understood by the average person, whether it's me and you who live with this maybe every day, or you know our kids, our mothers, our fathers, our sisters, our brothers who say, well, what's the big deal? My car has a technology, and of course it does. You know, they just don't quite get it.
I believe you're right. I think we don't fully understand that as that has expanded into areas that are really unfamiliar. We've moved from connected devices to now we have connected cities where lighting, environmental monitoring, traffic management systems are all connected together. Or if you go into the healthcare space, We have connected devices that are connected to hospitals, that are connected off to the suppliers there. Even the connected home. You mentioned the example where your refrigerator knows when you run low on food. My security system sent me a text the other day, says, hey, I couldn't talk to the base. All of those create a larger attack surface, because what is it that makes us believe now that we've been doing computer security for almost 50 years now, and yet nobody thinks our computers are secure? Why would we think Kenmore or Whirlpool or anybody who've been manufacturing refrigerators or washers are now all of a sudden cybersecurity experts? The reality is that's certainly not the case. And I think it's something that we have to deal with and find the proper role for industry, the proper role for the consumer, the proper role for business, and the proper role for government.
I think you bring up the proper roles, and I definitely want to go down that path. Before we go there, this is not just a personal issue, right? This is not just for you or me at my house, but this also, as you said, expands out to Whirlpool or Kenmore, and then even further out to all the services we take for granted: our water system, our banking system, our, as you mentioned, healthcare. All of those systems also are now becoming part of that connected universe, and that adds even a larger attack surface and more risk. Talk a little bit about why we as a society need to understand that risk and what can we do about it.
So society has to be aware of that and understand that these connections, while they provide benefits, they certainly do have risk with them. In early October, we saw the British pound fall 6% in less than 2 minutes. What caused that? Well, it was these high-frequency trading algorithms where machines were making decisions. If that were extrapolated out to our stock market, and since all the stock markets are connected, the world could see an economic collapse. Or in the transportation sector, as we move around, and our cars are now connected to that same device, it would be easy for a worm or something like that to propagate through transportation and do that at a city level. Later on, we can talk about the electrical grid. 70 million homes or businesses are now connected to the electrical grid, and it would be fairly easy as well. That represents a large attack surface for someone to go in and to shut that down. So in almost every sector, we find that we're connected in ways we've never been before. And so we're kind of on a new ground here, and we have to invent new processes, new technologies, and we just have to think about it differently.
I think that's a great point. New processes, new technologies, think about it differently. So what is then the role? Where does the government come into play for our audience who, whether you're at the energy department or with the commerce department or whatever agency you're working for, what role do they play in this new Internet of Things world?
Well, in general, although I'm in favor of the government having a smaller role, it's not unrealistic to assume that in a highly regulated industry like transportation or finance or healthcare, that the government has to have the role of protecting the citizens and protecting the public. And ways to do that are to put standards in place. But if you put standards in place, those standards need to have some level of authority or mandatory compliance with them. Just as an example, going back to your utility example, the school where my daughter goes, the government is more concerned with the nutrition of the meal that she's being served than they are the oil or the gas or the electricity to get that meal prepared, because one is mandatory compliance and one is voluntary compliance. We can't really have that situation. And then the second thing is, I do believe that when the government detects cyber attacks or intrusions on that, they really need to take that same response as they would if it were a physical attack. The government would not stand for another nation to come in and to steal intellectual property from someone on our sovereign soil. But what if they do it on our cyber soil? And companies like Caterpillar and John Deere have millions of dollars of economic loss as a result of that. I believe that's something that the government has to look at.
And it's an interesting point you bring up. If is a cyber attack and a physical attack very similar? And in many ways, the whole idea of cybersecurity over the years has really been based on that kinetic approach to security, where we're going to put a defense in depth, we're going to have multiple layers, the kind of the idea of the moat, and then the high wall, and then the guards, and then the you know what I mean?
Sure,
and what that's
absolutely.
shown is that the defense in depth, while it's a great term, is not working, or it's easier to breach in the cyber world than the physical world. Is that also now becoming more clear as we look at the more devices that are connected and that attack surface has grown?
Absolutely. We have to go to a behavior-based model where we're looking at observables instead of just going through and trying to put up a larger number of perimeters or concentric rings of security. We have to look at the behaviors that we see, and then based on that, make the decision, is this normal or not? If someone is printing 500 pages of a proposal at night, that may or may not be normal. If they're in business development, it's probably normal. But otherwise, we have to look at what is happening and the context in which that's happening. And that's true of whether it's a person or a device or a network of devices.
I think, just to go back for a second, you talk about the government's role and standards. And then I think your example of they're worried about the food at the schools versus the cybersecurity of the oil, the gas coming in. And I think part of the reason for that is it's still very new, right? We understand if you eat too much French fries, you gain too much weight, kids are unhealthy. It's not quite understood that if someone taps and hacks into the natural gas system and they stop gas from coming in, or too much gas from coming in, we haven't seen those type of attacks. So it's not forefront in front of us. Is that something that the government is starting to get a hold of? There's NIST and other places that are trying to create kind of working groups to start looking at what needs to go into the standards around IoT.
Yes, and I think across government, the whole of government, they're looking in that. Whether it's the Department of Energy looking at the critical infrastructure along with the Department of Homeland Security, or the Department of Transportation looking at that, or the Department of Commerce looking at the financial system. I believe each of the agencies within the government are trying to go out and explore this new world and to take the appropriate actions. One of the challenges is that the technology and the number of bad actors is increasing maybe faster than our ability to adapt. And so that's, again, something that we have to be on the watch for.
I think that point of that, the technology and the bad actors, it's not just one or the other. Briefly, just what can be done in the short term, do you think, to, for the government? What are some of the steps they could take in the short term in terms of their role to start addressing this dual threat? The more technology, the more bad actors.
So on the technology front, we love technology. Technology is a source of innovation. I believe that from a compliance standpoint, in certain areas, and let's just take medical devices as an example, I believe the government is going to have to publish mandatory standards that if you're going to have a medical device that is connected to a person, here are things that it must comply with. And I believe there are similar examples in the transportation sector. From the bad actor standpoint, this is where organizations like U.S. Cyber Command or the Homeland Security with the CERT, they have to get out in front of this threat and actually begin to apply some offensive cyber attacks, not to take a nation offline, but to go through and serve as, if nothing else, an irritant or an impediment to those people that are doing that work.
In many ways, what you're calling for is a little bit of deterrence, a little 1950s nuclear era deterrence was
Sure.
This idea of, hey, if you mess with us, this is what you get.
Exactly.
That's what it seems like. Okay, Barry, let's take a quick break on that note, and we can come back. We can talk a little more specifics. You're listening to the panel discussion, IoT Value and Risks in Today's Connected Environment, sponsored by Vencor on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.